just so I don't forget. Otherwise, I'll remember halfway through the session that I haven't clicked on the record button. And I think we have about 50% or more even actually of participants that signed up already here. So I'll start the session and hopefully others will join as the session progresses. So my name's Saima Rivett. I'm an inclusion coach here at the Bradford Council. I have kind of a decade of academic experience in fields of business and management, more specifically human resource management, and my research, my PhD research was on identity, hence the reason why kind of I've progressed into this area of intersectionality. I will tell you a little bit more about my research shortly. I think we've got someone who's not on mute. I can just hear kind of some wind in the background. So please, if you can mute yourself, that'd be very helpful. There we are. Okay, so after a short introduction on what intersectionality is, I will give you an example of application or the use of intersectionality in policy making just last year, and then move on to a definition of intersectionality and how we can practice or kind of be considering intersectionality in our daily lives. Moving on to the kind of bulk of this session, which will be an interactive activity, and giving you then an example of further reading if you wanted to know more. And then finally, I'll tell you a little bit about my journey that kind of got me to this point of thinking about experiences intersectionally. So what is intersectionality? Now, intersectionality is a term that many of you will have come across before now. As both a term and a concept, intersectionality is becoming much more popular across the world, especially in recent years, but it's still very often oversimplified and misunderstood. Now, even those of us that embrace intersectional thinking, we find that there are endless examples of intersectionality described as simply being a member of more than one social group whose voices deserve to be heard. However, intersectionality does in fact run much deeper than this vague description, and instead it offers a powerful lens to help us truly understand and overcome the deep-rooted inequity that stems from the intersection of our multiple identities. In short, intersectionality is a framework for understanding oppression and was first introduced by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, and Kimberly Crenshaw is a critical race theorist. Her framework was developed to be applied to all situations that are faced by women and recognises that all aspects of identity enrich the lived experiences of women. So in essence, this multiplied and complicated kind of phenomenon of intersectionality considers the various oppressions and experiences of being marginalised. This means that women can't actually separate out injustices, and this is simply because these injustices are experienced intersectionally and not individually. So an example of that could be intersectionality helping us understand that although women are subject to the wage gap, some are affected more harshly due to their race or even disability. Another example where intersectionality applies is cases of LGBTQ+ people that might be of colour, who may be harmed and at times even murdered for belonging to a specific race and also coming out as LGBTQ+. The intersectionality framework is useful because it highlights that discrimination and exclusion aren't simple and they can't be resolved by focusing on a single issue. And instead, it helps us understand how one experience is embedded within multiple others. So, for example, poverty in some cases, and that's a protected characteristic here in Bradford District, is gendered and racialised, and it differs within different social contexts. So taking an intersectional approach is crucial for us to understand inequalities that are faced by different groups, and we can overcome them by considering the complexity of identities and the patterns of oppression that individuals face within a given society. So what we have here is kind of the use of intersectionality in policy making by the Scottish Government. So intersectionality, as I said, is becoming kind of more a term or a concept that's being used more often, and it's becoming part of policy making. So last year, in March 2022, the Scottish Government published an evidence synthesis of literature on intersectionality, and they looked at what the concept means and how it can be applied to policy making and analysis. And because there are numerous definitions and understandings of intersectionality, the government paper proposes this diagram that we have in front of us here. as the foundational elements of intersectionality, which can be understood as the recognition that multiple people are shaped by their simultaneous membership of multiple interconnected social categories, plus the interaction between these multiple social categories that occurs within the context of connected systems and structures of power. This might be laws, policies, government, and this recognition of inequality of power is key to intersectionality, and structural inequalities reflected as relative disadvantage and privilege are actually the outcomes of the interaction between the social categories and the power relations and the context. So as a result, individuals' experiences of inequality can be chronic or transitory, and they create unique lived experiences. So in particular, it's important to note that this interaction or intersection of two or more characteristics with power dynamics within a given context gives rise to inequality, not just the presence of intersecting characteristics on their own. So definitions, we have the Oxford Dictionary definition, and this definition you'll find is kind of broadly used when we're thinking about intersectionality, and it is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender, as they apply to a given individual or group, regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. Now, in simple terms, what we're saying is intersectionality is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experience of discrimination and oppression, and we must consider everything and anything that can marginalize people. This might be gender, race, sexual orientation, physical ability, etc. And what I'll do in a short while is, following the interactive activity, I will give you some examples of where race intersects with kind of other parts of our identity, and how we can think about race and intersectionality more specifically. So what can we do? There are a few things that we can develop in our own understanding of intersectionality, and to support others to recognise the importance of taking this intersectional approach that I just told you about. And we can put intersectionality into practice our daily lives by being aware of how our own identity and relative privilege affect how we experience the world. And by doing so, we can make room for those that are at the crossroads of multiple oppressions and multifaceted marginalizations to share their stories. And one example, in terms of the putting intersectionality into our daily lives, I'm not going to say too much because I'm hoping that this session and the interactive element of it will help you address that. But an example of making rooms for those that are crossroads can be the allyship. I don't know if any of you've been, and hopefully some of you have been, to the allyship session that we had yesterday, which I didn't. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend it, but I heard it was a magnificent session. So hopefully you managed to kind of go into that and have a gain a better understanding of what allyship is. But becoming an ally is a really good place to start for those of you that might have attended either that session or understand what allyship is, or even if you'd like to know more and miss that session, you can hopefully catch up once we send the recordings out. So the third one here we have, so we can also support initiatives that work to combat discrimination through an intersectional approach. So an example could be here at the council, and I'm sure many organisations have staff networks. So here we're encouraged to join 2 staff networks. So we can do this by kind of making the connections between the two staff networks we're part of. So for me, I'm currently part of the disability staff network. I'm planning to join one of the others. And when I join one of the others, and I'm still thinking whether it will be something around kind of my gender, whether it'll be something around my ethnicity, or kind of something around my caring role as a parent. So I'm still in kind of a process of making that decision, but I'm hoping that I will be able to kind of think about the intersection of my identity that might make me feel marginalized, fitting into at least 2 of those staff networks that I'll be part of. And then finally, we can also encourage we can also ensure that people or encourage people to stay engaged in this process of questioning, learning and unlearning, and do so ourselves continuously and beyond the annual work that's been done, such as Race Equality Week. So we can do this throughout the year by recognising the intersecting disadvantages between various identities. So it might be making connections between Race Equality Week and Disability History Month, and thinking about, actually, we know when we go to Disability History Month events, kind of some of the marginalised experiences individuals individuals have. But when we think about actually how does that intersect with some of the race equality week events and the marginalized experiences people will have when it comes to race and ethnicity or language or religion, how can we kind of what would be the multiplied kind of impact of those 2 or 3 types of oppression or even more? So I've rushed through these first set of slides because I am quite conscious that we don't have a lot of time, and the interactive session I like to spend most of the time on so I can get you all involved. So I don't have your mics on mute. I do have the camera on mute only because the session is being recorded. So if anybody came in later and didn't get to kind of hear that, I have put it in the chat to let you know. But if you'd like for your camera to be on, I will now kind of change it so people can allow the cameras if they want to, but do bear in mind the session is recorded and we can't later, it'll be difficult to kind of remove the option of your camera. So I'm going to allow the cameras for attendees if you'd like to use them, but there is no pressure. So the interactive activity. So the session is going to focus on this activity to help us become more aware of our own identities and relative privileges. So this activity consists of multiple statements. I think we have A to H. Each statement will be displayed as the one you can see on the screen. So I'm hoping everyone can see that, and please do feel free to raise your hand to give me some indication that you have seen it. You can see the statement and you can see my screen. And this statement says, thank you very much, I've had a few hands up. The part of my identity that I am most aware of on a daily basis is, now a pop-up poll question, and I've checked this a million times because the last time I launched this, it didn't work, will launch on your screen. And that will allow you to type in the part of your identity that relates to the statement on the screen. You can either select one from the list I have here, which are very broad state categories, or you can be more specific. So for example, I might want to put woman or female instead of gender. So I'm hoping that's clear. I will launch the first one, and it seems like it's working so far. You should get a pop-up on your screen now, and you get to enter your response in there. And you can start thinking about intersectionality now, but I will prompt you to do that with the later statements as the session progresses. So as you put, and just so you all know, there, I will not know who has put what into this. So all I will see, and you should be able to see also, is a word cloud, just showing what the responses were across the room. So this kind of will be confidential as long as it's not put in the chat. If anything's put in the chat, there might be a way we can actually kind of ensure the video doesn't have the chat in there. But I would recommend using the poll so kind of your answer remains confidential. I will give you a minute before I move on to the next one because I don't want to rush anyone. Can everyone see the poll? Because I'm wondering whether...
Yeah, we can see the poll.
Perfect, that's fine, perfect. Just, I'm not seeing any responses just yet, so I thought maybe I'm doing something.
I'm trying to enter it, but it's not actually going through. I
made sure I should have
okay,
handled it
has that
differently
worked
in the future. So yeah.
It's not letting me submit mine either.
In your chat, I've got 6 responses so far, so I'm at 11 now. I'm wondering, in the chat column, you have an X and the tick. Are you able to put a tick in? Maybe that will help. We are getting some responses. Does anybody? Can anybody? I can only see my screen, so I'm not sure if any of the participants can give some advice on how they've.
It's only letting me tick or cross. It's not letting me add any words. I had the option to add words before, but now that's gone.
Okay, that's fine. What I will do is see if I can bring it up again. It'll be a second.
Yeah, it's the same for me as well, Simon.
Is it doing the same for you? That's very strange. Okay, that's fine. I have got a backup this time, so I don't have to worry about these issues. So this is what we will do instead is.
Simon, when I entered the answer to the first question, it wanted me to use the direction key. So I pressed return, that didn't work. So I pressed the next one, it took me to the next statement. So I'm wondering if you have to complete all 8 before it pulls the results back.
Oh, I see. That could be possible. That's what I'll do is if we just leave the poll for a moment, I'm going to put a link onto the chat for you all. That link will bring up my backup and might be the best way because I can then show you on the screen what your responses are. So there's the link.
Can I say something? Yeah, it does. I've been going through all of the questions because it just says go to next. So I've been answering all the questions.
Oh, I am sorry about
Because
that.
you go into the chat and then it says view poll, you view the poll, and then it brings up the questions and you can type
Okay.
it in the box and then it goes to next. So it's asking you to do all 8.
Yeah, it seems like I've set it up differently, which I probably have made the error, but I've got the backup, so don't worry. If you can click on the link on the backup, we can do this together, if that's okay. And I will share my screen so we can go through each of these together. I won't be a moment. Window, there we are. So, perfect. So the code's there as well. I can see people are already answering. If you can see my screen, you can see the kind of answer to the first poll question statement, the part of my identity that I'm most aware of. And what you can see here is when something's kind of larger, so we've got gender, which means more people have said gender than any other statement. 9 people have responded so far, as you can see in the bottom corner here. So I will give it another minute and allow others to answer. And then what I will do is give you access to the next one. Next question, when I think we've got about 20 responses, maybe. Perfect, we've got 14. So ethnicity, gender, and religion seem to be the parts of the identity that most people in this room are most aware of on a daily basis. Just thinking if I can switch. Yes, we've had 14 responses so far. And just to go back to my slides, I will give you an example. So in the past, when this first question was answered, most people said, and as you can see in my screen, the part of their identity in the past they were most aware of on a daily basis was gender, age, and disability. And these came up more commonly when people kind of did this activity in the past. I'm wondering whether anyone in the group would like to elaborate on the results that we're seeing today. So it's gone up to 16 so far. We've got ethnicity, gender, or religion, which seem to be the most common in the room. But we also have disability, age, sex, carer, faith, gender identity, body type, and race. So is there any other parts of your identity that you'd like to maybe share? There is no pressure, so you feel free to share in the chat if you want. And in the meantime, I will move on to the next question. So on the actual shared screen, you will see that I've moved on to the next question. So you should all now be able to put in the part of your identity that you are least aware of on a daily basis into that screen. So if you stay on the Mentimeter and don't come out, you will have an perfect. I've already got some responses. If you already came out, you can just follow the link again in the chat. It's the same link. And what I will do is, I will share that window, but I will leave that open. Yeah. And open my presentation separately. So far, as you can see on the screen, we're seeing 11 people have responded. Immigration status, ethnicity, sexual orientation, religion have come up at the top. We've got race, ability, gender. When this poll question was answered previously, and the reason I'm focusing on previous examples is actually because I know some of the statements will be very of sensitive nature, and some people may not want to be sharing. So I have kind of got some past answers just to kind of allow us to see where some people might be feeling or experiencing significance in a certain part of their identity and why. So past examples, we had age and ability, which were the most common, followed by race. And it was quite interesting because when individuals kind of said race, they gave examples about their kind of race as a privilege rather than and part of the identity they felt was disadvantaged. So I'll read some of the statements out to you. I chose race because I have a white passing privilege. Someone chose ability because they've never been able to identify as a person who is differently abled. Someone chose sexuality because they are cishet and have not felt scrutinized or observed due to that. Now, for those of you that might not already be aware, and for information purposes, the use of the term cishet refers to gender identity as well as sexual identity. This two-part identity means that a person is both cisgender and heterosexual. I'm making sure I get this right. To be cisgender means that you identify with the gender that you were assigned to at birth. And if you are cisgender, which is often shortened in discussion to cis, chances are you've not experienced gender dysphoria, where you feel unaligned with your assigned gender. And people who identify as cisgender may never have to think about their gender identity at all. And that in itself is a privilege. So we've got 15 people that have answered so far. And immigration status and sexual orientation, ethnicity and social class have come up at the top there. I will move on to the next statement. The part of my identity that was most emphasized or important in my family as I was growing up. We've got religion, ethnicity, social class. Is anyone struggling to see any of the poll questions on the Mentimeter link? And feel free to take the mic if you'd like to add anything about why you made the choice you did. I don't want to put any pressure on anyone, like I said earlier, which is why I'm not kind of encouraging anyone to put in the chat, but you are more than welcome. And we would really appreciate hearing your views if there's anything you'd like to share. So we've got ethnicity, religion, social class and gender, which have come up as the most common so far. In the past response that I had to this question, the part of my identity that was most emphasized as important in my family growing up was, and here race and gender came up most commonly. The individuals that said race, one example is I chose race because growing up with immigrant parents, Mexican culture was a huge part of my upbringing. Someone mentioned gender and said I chose gender because my family had a very clear difference between what boys were supposed to do and what girls are supposed to do. And then there were some other examples with ability and sexuality that were also put into there. So one was I chose sexuality because my family is not inclusive of those who are not heterosexual. Okay, I'll move on to the next one. The part of my identity that provides me the most privilege is, and you should see that on your screen. Which part of your identity do you feel provides you the most privilege? This got me thinking, actually, this question, because I never thought of privilege in the sense I did after I did this activity. Income is one that came up in one of the past activities that I did, and the individual said I chose income because I think I am privileged in terms of my family income, because I feel I do have that I have opportunities to travel and do things that I want to do. And I never actually thought of income as a privilege, but it is. And I think I thought of social class as a privilege, but didn't connect. And I guess subconsciously I connected income to that, but then consciously it wasn't something that is talked about, and it makes a huge difference. Another individual said, I chose income because my parents are well off, and because of that I have access to countless resources such as private lessons, extracurricular activities. I'm also able to attend an extremely expensive private school. I also saw race come up, and someone felt they were privileged because they're by race because they are white, and then someone brought ability up and said they chose ability because since they were able-bodied and had no visible disabilities, they felt like they were taken more seriously during any conversation. So we've got ethnicity, race, social class, gender identity. Again, if anybody wants to share anything regarding any of these, feel free to do so. The next
Sam,
step,
can I just
yeah,
add on that one?
of
A really
course.
interesting one for me was actually is sexuality, because as a South Asian sort of Muslim man, most of the presenting markers that I have create disadvantage in the environments that I sort of work. But as soon as in like organizations or in meetings or working with different people, as soon as I say that I'm a queer Muslim man, it immediately gives me advantage, because people all of a sudden lose their sort of negative markers of Muslim, negative markers of Asian man, and all of a sudden, like, well, if he's queer, it must mean he's very liberal, he's open-minded. It's like, so it automatically works interestingly, because normally for me, I would say sexuality is quite a challenging marker for people, so it creates disadvantage. But in my case, what I find is it eliminates the disadvantage associated with my other markers, and it gives me access and privilege in certain environments.
Thank you so very much for sharing that, Usman, and I completely agree. And in fact, when I go on to talking about my PhD journey, the kind of I moved away from an initial theory that I developed, and the later theory I developed actually looks at time and place as a dimension, and how we experience our identities differently in different times and in different places, and that's down to the surroundings of the people that we have and their kind of understanding. And if they have a stereotype, like you said, of your ethnic identity, when they kind of see your sexuality and the identity that you have there, it kind of to some extent overpowers your ethnic identity in that prejudice they had of you. And then that's really interesting experiences that. So thank you so very much, Usman, for sharing that with us today. So we've got quite a few more responses on that one. So I'll move on to the next one. The part of my identity that I believe is the most misunderstood by others is, and I think people have already started addressing that because I went back and forth. So we've got body size type, we've got gender identity and disability. And whilst you're answering that, I will tell you what some of the past answers were for the part of my identity that I believe is the most misunderstood. And here it was very mixed, I found. There was income, so someone chose income because many people think that especially this was an international student, and they said that many people think that since I'm an international student, I came from money. However, this is not the case, and I would like if people understood that. And I think I myself have been what's the word, an individual who has thought that, seeing foreign students as a student. I was a student at university, and I always thought foreign students came from money, but having kind of got to know them better and learn more about them, I've realized actually they've had to work damn hard to get to that place, because they have to pay a lot more than us. But if in terms of their fees, and when I say us, I mean a UK student who's not international, but I felt actually they have to also work harder, because their income in the country that individuals come from was in the case that, and the people that I knew, was significantly lower than the average income in this country. So it must have been significantly harder for that individual. Yes, I will have a loan to pay off and I will have debt, but it's 3 times less than what an international student would have to pay. But the chances are their income is probably 3 times less as well, which then kind of enhances the struggles that individuals had to face to come to university in a foreign country. We also had race. One individual chose race because they said, because I'm white technically, although don't necessarily appear to be at all. So again, sometimes your race you can be misunderstood because of your race. And there's another individual who's in one of my last sessions, and he mentioned how he came from multiple backgrounds, including Pakistani and Indian. And he found actually he had multiple experiences as a result of that. And then there's sexuality. I chose sexuality because I've been through situations where people misunderstood my sexuality. This is based on how I dress or how I present myself as more dominant or masculine, when in reality it's just who I am as a person, and it does not have anything to do with my sexuality. So I'm going to have a look at today's answers and where we've got to. Ethnicity, religion, the body type, income, age, sex, mental health status, gender identity, and it tells us, I think one of the things that I'm hoping that's shining through some of these answers is that everyone experiences their identity so very differently. And there's different parts of our identity that might have significance compared to others. And just because I experience one identity in a certain way doesn't mean somebody else will experience that identity in the same way if they share the same identity as me. So the next one, we're not far off now, and I don't have many examples. So from F, G, and H, these last three statements, I don't have any past examples to share. So I'm going to go by what I have on the screen. The part of my identity that I wish I knew more about is. Well, I have got past examples. I just don't have actually statements that I can refer directly to. I think something that's come up in the past was ethnicity or race, an individual, or heritage. Actually, it was more heritage linked to ethnicity and race, and kind of, well, what is my heritage? And oh, it's come up on the screen again here as well. And kind of how far back does it go? I know in terms of my own heritage, it didn't. 2 generations is kind of where my South Asian heritage is, but moving further back from that, I know it kind of pans out further in Asia, and possibly China, from what I'm learning from trying to gather somewhat of a family tree. And it does get difficult. I think the difficulty is having family or ancestry from the third world makes it much more challenging than to get that information, that data, because it's not recorded anywhere, it's not readily available, and it's probably buried in the ground somewhere in some part of the world. So it is. And then there was a conversation in my last session where actually the individual said none of that matters. Where we came from, and kind of what our heritage is, shouldn't have an impact on who we are today. And I agree to some extent it shouldn't. And again, coming back to my PhD, when we look at that, we'll get to see actually it is who we are today is, and kind of we are a product of all our life experiences from the moment we were born. And if our heritage was important in those early years of our life, then yes, that will have an impact on how we experience our being in the present time. So heritage has come up a couple of times. Well, a few actually. I think it's the strongest there. We've only got 9 responses so far. So I'm wondering if everybody's still okay and can still access it. I'm just going to go into the chat because I've got some examples in the chat. We've got someone that said, I was born in a special home for single mothers. No one in family wanted me or my mother, and spent some time in a home. So I can understand a dual heritage person who spent time in care. You are special and individual, and that's how I see myself. Oh, that is lovely. Thank you so very much. I'm not going to mention any names because it is recorded. Someone else has said I was in care in children's home. I think that was a response to this previous comment, and I'm dual heritage and grew up with identity crisis, being called an orphan and a half-breed. I am so sorry to hear that. I really am. One of the things that I would like to point out is, and if anybody is triggered by any of the kind of activity that we have today, we will be sending an evaluation form out at the end of this week. And when we send the evaluation form out, you will have an opportunity to say whether there was any triggers and whether you'd like to speak to someone, and hopefully we can kind of see if we can get you some support. And I do apologise if there are any triggers as a result of these questions and the statements that you're seeing today. So the next one, because we are running very short of time, the part of my identity that I feel is difficult to discuss with others who identify differently is. And I always use an example of parenting for me, because I'm a parent now. I have a 4-year-old and another baby on the way. But before my 4-year-old, I spent most of my life kind of not having the responsibility of a child or understanding parenthood. I had 14 nieces and nephews before my boy was born, but that does not necessarily didn't. And I actually felt like I was a parent to them, but now I realize I wasn't, and it was not the same, and I didn't actually truly understand the challenges of parenthood. So yeah, I think and now at times I find it difficult. I won't go into too much detail with an individual who doesn't have a child, not because I don't think they will understand, because I know everyone is different, but I think it's more, I feel like having had my own experiences where I didn't understand parenting, and found it not to be an interesting topic. Maybe I was naive at the time. I feel like I shouldn't burden others with that. So that's something that I find difficult to discuss with others who don't identify as having had experience of parenting. So we've got ethnicity, queerness, religion, race, body type, gender identity, not being a parent yet, and we've got wife on there. So thank you so much for that one. I'll give another 10 seconds and then I'll move on to the final statement, because I am worried we might run out of time. Feel free to take the mic though. If anybody wants to say anything, you are more than welcome. Okay, the last statement: the part of my identity that makes me feel discriminated against. And this is a statement that might trigger, and I apologize if it does, and hopefully if there is anything we can do to support individuals who feel triggered by this statement, please do get in touch before or after you get the evaluation form, whichever you feel comfortable with. So race, gender, religion, sex, body type. So for me, one of the reasons why I did my PhD in the beginning was because the one part of my identity that I didn't feel discriminated against, obviously until I did my PhD, and I'll tell you why in a moment, was race and ethnicity. And the reason why, and even maybe gender, a combination of the gender, race, ethnicity, and religion. And I don't know why I never felt discriminated against up until I did my PhD. And after my PhD, I wonder whether, and this is something that I ponder on often, is it that I didn't feel discriminated against, or was it that I was oblivious of my surroundings and those experiences? Because I can give countless experiences now that I am more aware, having done that kind of research. I remember at the age of 11, I went to a secondary school where there wasn't many Asians, and there was another girl who was at school with me, and she wore a hijab, and her hijab was pulled from her head right in front of me on numerous occasions. And I remember spending most of that year crying to my parents to go to a different school, and eventually they kind of helped me change schools, and I went to a school on another side of Bradford. But I still didn't feel that part of my identity was being discriminated against. So I think part of it, and that's one of the reasons why I ponder on the fact that it must have been oblivion that kind of caused me not to kind of feel that discrimination. I always saw the world as half full, and I think having kind of had more explicit experiences, but also having heard about other people's experiences, as we're doing here through my PhD research, I began to be more aware of different parts of my identity. So that's that. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen, and I'm going to go back to sharing my presentation with you all, because I am quite conscious of the time, as I keep saying. Someone's got their hand up and I can't see who, so please take the mic. You're more than welcome to do so.
Hi, I was just going to add, I grew up in Ireland and was probably the first Black person or first Muslim person that a lot of people had met, and was always pointed out as different. So the school teachers would kind of bring me up and go, "Oh, she's better at Irish than you are, even though she's not Irish." So and I didn't really understand that was like a pointing, you are other, until I came here in 2011. And I felt invisible for the first time, which was an incredible feeling. But I didn't realize how much it affected me until like I came here and thought, oh, okay, I'm in a place that nobody really cares about this. Obviously, there's lots of kind of discrimination that does happen, not as much as had happened before, but it just, I think maybe perhaps when we're younger, or if we don't really understand how we're othered, that then we don't really kind of come to terms with it, or the things that have been said to us until afterwards.
Thank you so much for that, Mayada. Thank you. I can hear my own voice, but it's gone now. It was echoing. But yes, I completely agree. Maybe there is kind of an element of that, especially when we're younger, not understanding it, and kind of not being able to make sense of that. And moving on to the actual the kind of end of this activity, I'm really hoping that carrying out this exercise has got you all thinking about the various parts of your identity, and not only that, but also helped you learn about the identities that others that you might work with or kind of see around you in your immediate environments on a regular basis, finding difficult to discuss with others that identify differently, or maybe the aspect of one's identity that might make others feel discriminated against has become more prominent in this session. This awareness and identity of identity and the relative privilege that some of us might experience, and how each of these are experienced by yourself and others is a great starting point for intersectional thinking. And I'm hoping that the work that we've begun here today, it won't be lost, and many of you will follow up on the kind of other ways that I've identified at the beginning before we started this activity, and how you could maybe not only start thinking intersectionally, but supporting others in kind of dealing with issues of discrimination or disadvantage or oppression that kind of stem from their intersecting identities. So what I'd like you to do, is maybe share what it was like, the activity was like for you. If you could share that in the chat, that'd be great, because I am quite conscious of the time. I don't want to be kind of keeping people up. If there were any identity categories that you think you would like to see, but were not options, again, please put that in the chat. It'd be great for me to be able to kind of add to those categories, or make sure I consider them in the future if you feel like they were important. I know many of you did kind of go into specifics and didn't use generalized ones, which is great. So I've got some examples now of race and intersectionality, because obviously this session isn't just about intersectionality. With it being amidst Race Equality Week, I thought it was really important to include these examples. So if any of you have been involved in my intersectionality sessions before, this will be something different to what you experienced in my sessions previously. So the first example here is in Canada. Indigenous people have been raising the alarm about the apparent lack of police or government interest in the high roles of missing Indigenous women. So here, being indigenous, which is ethnicity, and a woman, gender, intersect as historical markers of discrimination. And once again, people from these two categories find themselves statistically disadvantaged. The next example we have is white women, the missing white woman syndrome. This is the coined term to describe the media's hyper-focus on white women who go missing. And within this term is an implicit accusation that the media doesn't pay the same amount of attention when people with identity markers go missing. So, for example, this syndrome sits in stark contrast to the missing murdered Indigenous problems highlighted in the first point. And then we've got stereotypes about Asian women that often sit at the intersection of racism against Asians and sexism against women. But the confluence of these two identity markers does raise some unique stereotypes around being exotic, submissive, and even a service worker. And this can lead to Asian women being bullied for people expecting them to know their place at the bottom of the social order, and even harassment from men desiring the exotic other. And then we've got 4, which is people who are Black have historically faced discrimination due to the colour of their skin. But people who are gay have similarly faced discrimination due to their sexuality. So people who are Black and gay face discrimination on 2 fronts, putting them at extra disadvantage. And in fact, there's studies that have found that Black people also face the problem that they are underrepresented in the research on LGBTQ+ experiences, specifically research from 2017 that highlights that most research on LGBTQ+ people use white Western samples. So as a result of that, the Black gay people's experiences can be marginalised and not truly understood, especially by health and social care professionals. And then finally, we have the white male, and while white and male tend to be positions of power in society, there's an interesting issue of disadvantage among working class white and male in the northeast of England. And this has led to a significant amount of research into why they are the lowest performing ethnic group in Britain's education system. And the research just shows that there's now intergenerational disadvantage in areas like the northeast of England, where white working class males come up with low social capital, deteriorating infrastructure, and few family members who have a post-secondary level of education. So what I've also got here is there are lots of texts. This is not the only one. There's lots of texts that are emerging on intersectionality. So what I've put here is a recent example of a really good textbook by Collins and Bilge, who invite readers to engage with the various complexities of intersectionality as an analytical tool. And I chose this book specifically because it's written in accessible language and for a wide audience. Someone also asked me if this book is accessible for people that are blind, and I had a look, and there is a version on Amazon that can be purchased for people that are blind, and hopefully there are other accessible versions if anyone needs one. And in the second edition of the textbook on key concepts of intersectionality, the authors do discuss an extensive variety of cases to show how intersectionality can dismantle the operations of interconnected power relations on a global level and also a national and local level. And they also kind of explore the kind of social and economic inequality that affects people differently, and look at how lived experiences of intersecting oppression and exploitation can engender activisms. So I'm not going to say too much here. What I have done is listed the 6 core ideas of intersectionality that are presented in this book, and they lay kind of important ground for intersectionality as a framework for context-specific analysis, and also a critique of the interconnected power relations that I've already mentioned. So I've got 10 minutes, and I don't know if our 10 minutes are going to be enough, but before I move on, I'll have a look and see if we've got anything in the chat. Thank you very much. So I can see we've got some examples of what I can include as kind of in the categories that I've put there. So thank you. So my research, so my journey towards understanding what I refer to as complex hybridity. I started with life story interviews to explore the working lives of British-born South Asian ethnic minorities. And what I did was I explored their working lives from as far back as they could remember. So life story interviews are usually very much in depth. They can last between 1 and 2 hours, as most of my interviews did. And I had interviewees aged from the age of 20 to about 50. And I asked them to tell me about experiences that they had throughout their life as far back as they could remember from childhood. Some were able to recall nursery, some were able to start at primary school, and they told me about things like their the kind of influences they had, the relationships they may have had with teachers and peers, the influences they may have had from communities and parents, job centre, education service providers, career services, but also we talked about periods of employment and unemployment, and lots of rich data came out of that. And as a result of that data, I created my initial theory. And this initial theory was named hybridity. And there was 2 main categories and 4 subcategories, as you can see here. And when I began to apply this theory to myself as a British-born South Asian ethnic minority, I very quickly found that actually I didn't fit into either one of these categories, which is what I was claiming these individuals did. I fit into all 4 of these categories at different points in my life, sometimes even in a different point in the day, depending on where I am. The place or the environment that I was in might have influenced which element of my identity I acted out. Whether I was dominant South Asian, whether I was adaptive hybrid. If it was Eid, then I was at home with my family, then I was dominant South Asian. If I was out with friends, I was dominant Western. There was times when I had to be adaptive and move between the two. And then the amalgamation of kind of all of my experiences put together and how I kind of acted that part of my identity out made me realize that if I publish a theory that is so rigid and puts people into these 4 boxes, it could be quite damaging, and it could only add to the oppression that ethnic minorities from this category face. So I decided to reject my own theory. In the middle of my thesis, contrary to what my supervisor thought I should do, I decided that I can't continue any further. And I searched and I searched and I searched, and I found a needle in a haystack. I came across David Hume. Some of you might not have, many of you probably haven't heard of David Hume. He looks at the philosophical relations of objects, and looking at his theory made me think about the philosophical relations of human experiences. I had all this rich data now. And so I took his theory and thought, okay, if I applied this data to his theory, would it really help me gain a richer understanding of the intersections of being South Asian and all their other experiences? And whether it's protected characteristics or kind of social categories beyond that. And in that, I began to realize that actually there was something there, and that's where my theory of complex hybridity came up, and the kind of what Usman mentioned earlier about space and time and how we experience our identity or our sense of being differently in different spaces of time. I was able to kind of draw out through this theory the quality of our experiences and the quantity can have an impact on then how we present ourselves in the future or how we experience our being. So it might be that we have the same experience 1,000 times, but the quantity of that experience doesn't have the same impact on us and the way we see ourselves compared to the quality of one single experience. And I can't go into too much detail because we don't have a lot of time, but this is kind of something that I'm hoping that I will get to share in another session, specifically on hybridity and looking in more detail at this kind of journey, but also with some real examples from my research at some point in the future. And then we have the other dimensions are here as well. We've got resemblance, and the physical self was a really, really interesting one for me, because physical self for me is actually all about perception. There is no fact, there's always 2 or 3 sides to a story. So how I see someone who's in front of me compared to how someone else sees that individual will be very different. How I perceive myself and how 10 other people perceive me will all be very different, because I'm perceiving myself based on my life experiences, and they're perceiving me based on their life experiences. And that combination of those life experiences has shaped how they think and where they are at that moment in time. So without confusing people much any further, I'll move on to the last part of my theory. I couldn't stop there. I felt like there was still something missing, and that's when I used myself as a kind of as a subject in my study, and I looked at the moment by moment composition of the self, and I was able to find, and I looked at numerous moments in my own life. And when I say moments, I'm referring specifically to moments, not minutes and not seconds, moments. And in a moment, which is a few milliseconds, I was able to find that I could be 22 different people in my head. And when I say people, I'm talking about versions of myself. I'm talking about beings. And if I could be 22 different people in my head, and I was having to think, if I was thinking as, for example, as at the time I was doing my PhD, if I was thinking as a student, I was also at the same time having to have my hat on as a child to 2 elderly parents, but also my hat on as a sibling, but also my hat on as an academic. And so every aspect of my being was influenced by another. And I thought that was really, really important to consider when we think about identity and when we think about oppression, because there's so much intersection in our identities and our sense of self, and it's not always often easy to recognize or a kind of to articulate to others. However, we do experience such complexity in our beings, and that needs to be recognized when we think about intersectionality, or at least at the very minimum, kind of recognizing that we cannot truly understand another individual and how they experience. For example, with disability, I know from experience that the kind of disability and the kind of legal definition around it is about how every individual experiences it differently. We could have 2 individuals with the same condition, but they could both experience stark differences in that condition on a daily basis. So I'm going to stop there. If there's any final questions, please. I don't know why I've said rate your experience, but I haven't got a pop-up question for that, because we've decided now to do to do evaluation forms. So you should get an evaluation form by email. But if you've got any final questions, I'm still here for a few more minutes. So, or any comments or anything at all, you're more than welcome to share them with me. I think I've rambled on enough now.
Hi, I just wanted to say I've been in and out of the session, but I really, really enjoyed it. I missed a little bit of the start and I'm looking forward to reading it back. But I'm a recent graduate from international relations and politics, so a lot of this was similar to the work I used to do. So it was really, really interesting hearing about what you've done. It sounds fantastic.
Thank you very much, Gwen. Thank you. I've actually got a niece who's about to go to Queen's Mary, I think, to do international relations and politics. So yeah, exciting topic. Thank you so much for the lovely comments in the chat section. I'm reading through them now. And I'm glad that everyone's enjoyed the session. I actually had a million nightmares last night because of the number of people we had in the session, but I had lots and lots of nightmares, just things going starkly wrong, which is why I had a backup plan for the questions. So I think that worked quite well in the end. Hi, Helen.
Hi, Sam. Yeah, I was just going to say thank you, but when you work with we work with carers, and you know, I've worked with carers and young carers for years and years, and it is kind of a new thing to think of them in the way of that intersectionality, and it's really been a really useful time because we're looking at starting groups for LGBT carers, and we have ethnic minority care. You know, we've got all of these different subsets of people, and to think about how we best meet their needs, rather than just thinking that everyone's carers and we work with carers and they're all the same, and which is a ridiculous concept, isn't it? But realizing how different the things that they're facing are, it's been a really interesting session. Thank you.
You're more than welcome, Helen. And if it's possible, I would always suggest when you have to work with a new group of people, do like maybe a focus group or so, kind of some kind of questionnaire, just to understand a little bit more about what caring means to them and what some of the issues, challenges they may be facing, but also some of the kind of opportunities they have from caring, because it could be that, you know, there could be sort of, not only we could use that data to kind of think about how we can support them better, but maybe use some of the experiences they've already had to support other individuals who might have experienced something similar and don't have access to. So yeah, it's lovely to hear that you're working with a different group of people, and hopefully it will be successful.
Thank you.
Welcome. All right, thank you very much, everyone. I think we've got a few people that are saying they've got to go, so thank you so much for attending, and I will stop the recording now. Thank you.